The Mabinogion. Chapter 1. Introduction. Whilst engaged on the translations contained in these volumes and on the notes appended to the various tales, I have found myself led unavoidably into a much more extensive course of reading than I had originally contemplated, and one which in great measure bears directly upon the earlier medieval romance. Before commencing these labors, I was aware, generally, that there existed a connection between the Welsh Mabinogion and the romance of the continent, but as I advanced, I became better acquainted with the closeness and extent of that connection, its history and the proofs by which it is supported. At the same time, indeed, I became aware, and still strongly feel, that it is one thing to collect facts and quite another to classify and draw from them their legitimate conclusions, and though I am loath that what has been collected with some pains should be entirely thrown away, it is unwillingly and with diffidence that I trespass beyond the acknowledged province of a translator. In the 12th and 13th centuries there arose into general notoriety in Europe a body of romance which in various forms retained its popularity till the Reformation. In it the plot, the incidents, the characters were almost wholly those of chivalry, that bond which united the warriors of France, Spain, and Italy with those of pure Teutonic descent and embraced more or less firmly all the nations of Europe, excepting only the Slavonic races not yet risen to power and the Celts who had fallen from it. It is not difficult to account for this latter omission. The Celts, driven from the plains into the mountains and islands, preserved their liberty and hated their oppressors with fierce and not causeless hatred. A proud and free people, isolated both in country and language, were not likely to adopt customs which implied brotherhood with their foes. Such being the case, it is remarkable that when the chief romances are examined, the name of many of the heroes and their scenes of action are found to be Celtic, and those of persons and places famous in the traditions of Wales and Brittany. Of this the romances of Owain and Gawain, Sir Perceval de Gauls, Eric and Enid, Mort d'Arthur, Sir Lancelot, Sir Tristan, the Graal, and C. may be cited as examples. In some cases a tendency to triads and other matters of internal evidence point in the same direction. It may seem difficult to account for this. Although the ancient dominion of the Celts over Europe is not without enduring evidence in the names of the mountains and streams, the great features of a country, yet the loss of their prior language by the great mass of the Celtic nations in southern Europe, if indeed their successors in territory be it all of their blood, prevents us from clearly seeing and makes us wonder how stories originally embodied in the Celtic dialects of Great Britain and France could so influence the literature of nations to whom the Celtic languages were utterly unknown. Whence then came these internal marks and these proper names of persons and places, the features of a story usually of earliest date and least likely to change? These romances were found in England, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, and even Iceland as early as the beginning of the 13th and end of the 12th century. The Germans, who propagated them through the nations of the north, derived them certainly from France. Robert Wass published his Anglo-Norman romance of the Brut d'Angleterre about 1155. Sir Tristan was written in French prose in 1170, and the Chevalier au Lion, Chevalier de l'Épée, and Sir Lancelot du Lac in metrical French by Christian de Troyes before 1200. From these facts it is to be argued that the further back these romances are traced, the more clearly does it appear that they spread over the continent from the northwest of France. The older versions, it may be remarked, are far more simple than the later corruptions. In them there is less allusion to the habits and usages of chivalry, and the Welsh names and elements stand out in stronger relief. It is a great step to be able to trace the stocks of these romances back to Wass or to his country and age. For Wass's work was not original. He himself, a native of Jersey, appears to have derived much of it from the Historia Brittonum of Gruffydd ap Arthur, commonly known as Geoffrey of Monmouth, born 1128, who himself professes to have translated from a British original. It is, however, very possible that Wass may have had access, like Geoffrey, to independent sources of information. To the claims set up on behalf of Wass and Geoffrey to be regarded as the channels by which the Cymric tales passed into the continental romance may be added those of a third, almost contemporary author. Laudimon, a Saxon priest, dwelling about 1200 upon the banks of the Upper Severn, acknowledges for the source of his British history the English Bede, the Latin Alban, and the French Wass. The last named, however, is by very much his chief and, for Welsh matters, his only avowed authority. His book, nevertheless, contains a number of names and stories relating to Wales of which no traces appear in Wass or indeed in Geoffrey, but which he was certainly in a very favorable position to obtain for himself. Laudeman, therefore, not only confirms Geoffrey in some points, but it is clear that, professing to follow Was, he had independent access to the great body of Welsh literature then current. Sir F. Madden has put this matter very clearly in his recent edition of Laudeman. The Abbé de la Rue also was of opinion that Gaimar, an Anglo-Norman in the reign of Stephen, usually regarded as a translator of Geoffrey of Monmouth, had access to a Welsh independent authority. In addition to these is to be mentioned the English version of Sir Tristram, which Sir Walter Scott considered to be derived from a distinct Celtic source and not, like the later Amadis, Pomeran and Lord Berners's canon of romance, imported into English literature by translation from the French. For the Annals of Arthur recently published by the Camden Society, their editor, Mr. Robson, seems to hint at a similar claim. Here then are various known channels by which portions of Welsh and Armoric fiction crossed the Celtic border and gave rise to the more ornate and widely spread romance of the Age of Chivalry. It is not improbable that there may have existed many others. It appears then that a large portion of the stocks of medieval romance proceeded from Wales. We have next to see in what condition they are still found in that country. That Wales possessed an ancient literature containing various lyric compositions and certain triads in which are arranged historical facts or moral aphorisms has been shown by Sharon Turner, who has established the high antiquity of many of these compositions. The more strictly romantic literature of Wales has been less fortunate, though not less deserving of critical attention. Small portions only of it have hitherto appeared in print, the remainder being still hidden in the obscurity of ancient manuscripts. Of these the chief is supposed to be the Red Book of Her Jest, now in the library of Jesus College, Oxford, and of the 14th century. This contains, besides poems, the prose romances known as Mabinogion. The Black Book of Caermarthen, preserved at Haert and considered not to be of later date than the 12th century, is said to contain poems only. 1 U. The Mabinogion, however, though thus early recorded in the Welsh tongue, are in their existing form by no means wholly Welsh. They are of two tolerably distinct classes. Of these, the older contains few allusions to Norman customs, manners, arts, arms, and luxuries. The other, and less ancient, are full of such allusions and of ecclesiastical terms. Both classes, no doubt, are equally of Welsh root, but the former are not more overlaid or corrupted than might have been expected from the communication that so early took place between the Normans and the Welsh, whereas the latter probably migrated from Wales and were brought back and retranslated after an absence of centuries with a load of Norman additions. Kilwch and Olwen and the Dream of Rhonabwy may be cited as examples of the older and purer class, the Lady of the Fountain, Peredur, and Geraint of Urban, of the later, or decorated. Besides these, indeed, there are a few tales as Amlin and Amic, Sir Bevis of Hamtown, the Seven Wise Masters, and the Story of Charlemagne, so obviously of foreign extraction and of late introduction into Wales, not presenting even a Welsh name or allusion, and of such very slender intrinsic merit that although comprised in the Llewr Cock, they have not a shadow of claim to form part of the canon of Welsh romance. Therefore, although I have translated and examined them, I have given them no place in these volumes. There is one argument in favor of the high antiquity in Wales of many of the Mabinogion, which deserves to be mentioned here. This argument is founded on the topography of the country. It is found that Saxon names of places are very frequently definitions of the nature of the locality to which they are attached, as Clifton, Deepden, Bridgeford, Thorpe, Ham, Wick, and the like, whereas those of Wales are more frequently commemorative of some event, real or supposed, said to have happened on or near the spot, or bearing allusion to some person renowned in the story of the country or district. Such are Llywyn y Morwynion, the Lake of the Maidens, Archwidi y Bed, the Ford of the Grave, Bryn Cypherger, the Hill of Assault, and so on. But as these names could not have preceded the events to which they refer, the events themselves must be not unfrequently as old as the early settlement in the country. And as some of these events and fictions are the subjects of and are explained by existing Welsh legends, it follows that the legends must be, in some shape or other, of very remote antiquity. It will be observed that this argument supports remote antiquity only for such legends as are connected with the greater topographical features as mountains, lakes, rivers, seas, which must have been named at an early period in the inhabitation of the country by man. But there exist, also, legends connected with the lesser features as pools, hills, detached rocks, caves, fords, and the like, places not necessarily named by the earlier settlers but the names of which are, nevertheless, probably very old. since the words of which they are composed are in many cases not retained in the colloquial tongue in which they must once have been included and are in some instances lost from the language altogether, so much so as to be only partially explicable even by scholars. The argument applies likewise, in their degree, to camps, barrows, and other artificial earthworks. Conclusions thus drawn, when established, rest upon a very firm basis. They depend upon the number and appositeness of the facts, and it would be very interesting to pursue this branch of evidence in detail. In following up this idea, the names to be sought for might thus be classed. Eigennames of the great features involving proper names and actions. Kader Idris and Kader Arthur both involve more than a mere name. Idris and Arthur must have been invested with heroic qualifications to have been placed in such seats. 2. Names of lesser features as Bryn y Saith, Hill of the Dart, Llwyn Clys, Lake of the Engulfed Court, 7y Bed, the Ridge of the Grave, Rhyd Season, the Saxon's Ford. 3. Names of mixed natural and artificial objects as Coten Arthur, Arthur's Coit, Serag y Drudion, the Crag of the Heroes, which involve actions, and such as embody proper names only as Serag Howell, the Crag of Howell, Caer Arianrhod, the Camp of Arianrhod, Bron Gorenwy, the Breast of the Hill of Gorenwy, Castel Mab Winion, the Castle of the Son of Winion, Nant Gurthirn, the Rill of Vortigern. The selection of names would demand much care and discretion. The translations should be indisputable and, where known, the connection of a name with a legend should be noted. Such a name as Mochtrov, Swinetown, would be valueless unless accompanied by a legend. It is always valuable to find a place or work called after an individual because it may help to support some tradition of his existence or his actions. But it is requisite that care be taken not to push the etymological dissection too far. Thus, Caer Arianrhod should be taken simply as the Camp of Arianrhod and not rendered the Camp of the Silver Circle because the latter, though it might possibly have something to do with the reason for which the name was borne by Arianrhod herself, had clearly no reference to its application to her camp. It appears to me, then, looking back upon what has been advanced, that we have throughout Europe at an early period a great body of literature known as medieval romance which, amidst much that is wholly of Teutonic origin and character, includes certain well-marked traces of an older Celtic nucleus. 2. Proceeding backwards in time, we find these romances, their ornaments falling away at each step, existing towards the 12th century, of simpler structure and with less encumbered Celtic features in the works of Was and other bards of the Langue d'Oil. 3. We find that Geoffrey of Monmouth, Laudimon, and other early British and Anglo-Saxon historians and minstrels on the one hand transmitted to Europe the rudiments of its after-romance, much of which, on the other hand, they drew from Wales. 4. Crossing into Wales we find, in the Mabinogion, the evident counterpart of the Celtic portion of the continental romance, mixed up, indeed, with various reflex additions from beyond the border, but still containing ample internal evidence of a Welsh original. Looking at the connection between divers of the more ancient Mabinogion and the topographical nomenclature of part of the country, we find evidence of the great, though indefinite, antiquity of these tales and of an origin which, if not indigenous, is certainly derived from no European nation. It was with a general belief in some of these conclusions that I commenced my labors, and I end them with my impressions strongly confirmed. The subject is one not unworthy of the talents of a Llwyd or a Pritchard. It might, I think, be shown, by pursuing the inquiry, that the Cymric nation is not only, as Dr. Pritchard has proved it to be, an early offshoot of the Indo-European family and a people of unmixed descent, but that when driven out of their conquests by the later nations, the names and exploits of their heroes and the compositions of their bards spread far and wide among the invaders and affected intimately their tastes and literature for many centuries, and that it has strong claims to be considered the cradle of European romance. C. E. G. Dale, August 29, 1848.